This is the children of Hurin, the Narnichin Hurin. Chapter 2. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Many songs are yet sung, and many tales are yet told by the elves of the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, in which Fingon fell, and the flower of the Eldar withered. If all were now retold, a man's life would not suffice for the hearing. Here then shall be recounted only those deeds which bear upon the fate of the house of Hador and the children of Hurin the Steadfast. Having gathered at length all the strength that he could, Maedhros appointed a day, the morning of midsummer. On that day the trumpets of the Eldar greeted the rising of the sun, and in the east was raised the standard of the sons of Fëanor, and in the west the standard of Fingon, king of the Noldor. Then Fingon looked up from the walls of Aethel Sirion, and his host was arrayed in the valleys and woods upon the east of Ered Withrin, well hid from the eyes of the enemy. But he knew that it was very great, for there all the Noldor of Hithlum were assembled, and to them were gathered many elves of the Falas and of Nargothrond. And he had great strength of men. Upon the right was stationed the host of Dorlomin, and all the valour of Hurin and Huor his brother, and to them had come Haldir of Brethil, their kinsman, with many men of the woods. Then Fingon looked east, and his elven sight saw far off a dust and the glint of steel like stars in a mist, and he knew that Maedhros had set forth, and he rejoiced. Then he looked towards Thangorodrim, and there was a dark cloud about it, and a black smoke went up, and he knew that the wrath of Morgoth was kindled, and that their challenge would be accepted, and a shadow of doubt fell upon his heart. But at that moment a cry went up, passing on the wind from the south from vale to vale, and elves and men lifted up their voices in wonder and joy, for unsummoned and unlooked for, Turgon had opened the leaguer of Gondolin, and was come with an army 10,000 strong, with bright mail, and long swords, and spears like a forest. Then, when Fingon heard afar the great trumpet of Turgon, the shadow passed, and his heart was uplifted, and he shouted aloud, Atulian aure, aya eldale, ar atanatarni, Utulian aure. The day has come. Behold, people of the Eldar and fathers of men, the day has come. And all those who heard his great voice echo in the hills answered, crying, Auta illume! The night is passing. It was not long before the great battle was joined, for Morgoth knew much of what was done and designed by his foes, and had laid his plans against the hour of their assault. Already a great force out of Angband was drawing near to Hithlum, while another, and greater, went to meet Maedhros to prevent the union of the powers of the kings. And those that came against Fingon were clad all in dun raiment, and showed no naked steel, and thus were already far over the sands of Anfauglith before their approach became known. Then the hearts of the Noldor grew hot, and their captains wished to assail their foes on the plain. But Fingon spoke against this. Beware of the guile of Morgoth, lords, he said. Ever his strength is more than it seems, and his purpose other than he reveals. Do not reveal your own strength, but let the enemy spend his first assault on the hills. For it was the design of the kings that Maedhros should march openly over the Anfauglith with all his strength, of elves and of men and of dwarves. And when he had drawn forth, as he hoped, the main armies of Morgoth in answer, then Fingon should come on from the west, and so the might of Morgoth should be taken as between hammer and anvil, and be broken to pieces. And the signal for this was to be the firing of a great beacon in Dorthonion. But the captain of Morgoth in the west had been commanded to draw out Fingon from his hills by whatever means he could, He marched on, therefore, until the front of his battle was drawn up before the stream of Sirion, from the walls of the Barad Ithil to the fen of Serch, and the outposts of Fingon could see the eyes of their enemies. But there was no answer to his challenge, and the taunts of his orcs faltered as they looked upon the silent walls and the hidden threat of the hills. Then the captain of Morgoth sent out riders with tokens of parley, and they rode up before the very walls of the outworks of the Barad Ithil, with whom they brought Gelmir, son of Gwilin, the lord of Norgothrond, whom they had captured in the Bragolach, and had blinded, and their heralds showed him forth, crying, "We have many more such at home, but you must make haste if you would find them, for we shall deal with them all when we return, even so." And they hewed off Gelmir's arms and legs and left him. By ill chance, at that point in the outposts stood Gwyndor, son of Gwilin, with many folk of Nargothrond, and indeed he had marched to war with such strength as he could gather because of his grief for the taking of his brother. Now his wrath was like a flame, and he leapt forth upon horseback, and many riders with him, and they pursued the heralds of Angband, and slew them. And all the folk of Nargothrond followed after, and they drove on deep into the ranks of Angband. And seeing this, the host of the Noldor was set on fire, and Fingon put on his white helm, and sounded his trumpets, and all his host leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds, and so fell and swift was their onset that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before the decoying army that he had sent west could be strengthened, it was swept away and destroyed, and the banners of Fingon passed over the Unfauglith, and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of that battle went Gwyndor and the folk of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be restrained, and they burst through the outer gates, and slew the guards within the very courts of Angband, and Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. But Gwyndor was trapped there, and taken alive, and his folk slain. For Fingon could not come to his aid. By many secret doors in Fangorodrim, Morgoth let forth his main strength that he had held in waiting, and Fingon was beaten back with great loss from the walls of Angband. Then, in the plain of the Unfauglith, on the 4th day of the war, there began the Nirnaeth or Nordiad, all the sorrow of which no tale can contain. Of all that befell in the eastward battle, of the rousing of Glaurung the dragon by the dwarves of Belegost, of the treachery of the Easterlings, and the overthrow of the host of Maedhros, and the flight of the sons of Fëanor, no more here is said. In the west, the host of Fingon retreated over the sands, and there fell Haldir, son of Halmir, and most of the men of Brethil. But on the 5th day, as night fell, and they were still far from Ered Withrin, the armies of Angband surrounded the army of Fingon, and they fought until day pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, for the horns of Turgon were heard, as he marched up with the main host of Gondolin. For Turgon had been stationed southward, guarding the passes of Sirion, and he had restrained most of his folk from the rash onslaught. Now he hastened to the aid of his brother, and the Noldor of Gondolin were strong, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun, for the sword and harness of the least of the warriors of Turgon was worth more than the ransom of any king among men. Now the phalanx of the guard of the king broke through the ranks of the orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother. And it is said that the meeting of Turgon with Hurin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad in the midst of the battle. For a while, then, the hosts of Angband were driven back, and Fingon again began his retreat. But having routed Maedhros in the east, Morgoth had now great forces to spare, and before Fingon and Turgon could come to the shelter of the hills, they were assailed by a tide of foes thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothmog, High Captain of Angband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounding King Fingon, and thrusting Torgon and Hurin aside towards the fen of Serech. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last, Fingon stood alone, with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog until a Balrog came behind him and cast a thong of steel around him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the king of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. The field was lost, but still Hurin and Huor and the remnant of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the passes of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, lord, while time is, for you are the last of the house of Fingolfin, and in you lives the last hope of the Eldar. While Gondolin stands, Morgoth should still know fear in his heart." "Not long now can Gondolin remain hidden, and being discovered, it must fall," said Turgon. "Yet if it stands only a little while," said Huor, "then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, lord, with the eyes of death. Though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall arise. Farewell!" Maeglin, Turgon's sister-son, who stood by, heard these words and did not forget them. Then Turgon took the counsel of Hurin and Huor, and he gave orders that his host should begin a retreat into the passes of Sirion, and his captains, Ecthelion and Glorfindel, guarded the flanks to right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass by them, for the only road in that region was narrow, and ran near the west bank of the growing stream of Sirion. But the men of Dorlomin held the rear guard, as Hurin and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to escape from the Northlands, and if they could not win back to their homes, there they would stand to the end. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward until, coming behind the guard of Hurin and Huor, he passed down Sirion and escaped, and he vanished into the mountains and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnant of the mighty men of the house of Hador about them, and foot by foot they withdrew, until they came behind the fen of Serech, and had the stream of Revel before them. There they stood, and gave way no more. Then all the hosts of Angband swarmed against them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the remnant of Hithlum as a gathering tide about a rock. There, as the sun westered, and the shadows of the Eredwithrin grew dark, Huor fell, pierced with a venomed arrow in the eye, and all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap, and the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and seized the axe of an orc captain and wielded it two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered, and each time that he slew, Hurin cried aloud, "Aura in Dulva! Day shall come again." 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive by the command of Morgoth, who thought thus to do him more evil than by death. Therefore the orcs grappled Hurin with their hands, which clung to him still, though he hewed off their arms, and ever their numbers were renewed, till he fell buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him, and dragged him to Angband with mockery. Thus ended the Mirnaeth Arnurdiad, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hithlum, and there came a great storm of wind out of the west. Great was the triumph of Morgoth, though all the purposes of his malice were not yet accomplished. One thought troubled him deeply and marred his victory with unquiet. Turgon had escaped his net. Of all his foes, the one whom he had desired most to take or destroy. For Turgon of the great house of Fingolfin was now by right king of all the Noldor, and Morgoth feared and hated the house of Fingolfin because they had scorned him in Valinor and had the friendship of Ulmo, his foe, and because of the wounds that Fingolfin gave him in battle. And most of all, Morgoth feared Turgon. For of old in Valinor his eye had lighted on him, and whenever he drew near, a dark shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden in doom, from Turgon ruin should come to him. Chapter 3. The Words of Hurin and Morgoth. Now by the command of Morgoth, the orcs, with great labour, gathered all the bodies of their enemies, and all the harness and weapons, and piled them in a mound in the midst of the plain of Anfauglith, and it was like a great hill that could be seen from afar, and the Eldar named it Hauderchenirneath. But grass came there and grew again, long and green upon that hill, alone in all the desert, and no servant of Morgoth thereafter trod upon the earth, beneath which the swords of the Eldar and the Edain crumbled into rust. The realm of Fingon was no more, and the sons of Fëanor wandered as leaves before the wind. To Hithlum none of the men of Hador's house returned, nor any tidings of the battle and the fate of their lords. But Morgoth sent thither men who were under his dominion, swarthy Easterlings, and he shut them in that land, and forbid them to leave it. This was all that he gave them of the rich rewards that he had promised them for their treachery to Maedhros, to plunder and harass the old and the children and the womenfolk of Hador's people. The remnant of the Eldar of Hithlum, all those who did not escape into the wilds and the mountains, he took to the mines of Angband, and they became his thralls. But the orcs went freely through all the north, and pressed ever southward into Beleriand. There Doriath yet remained, and Nargothrond, but Morgoth gave little heed to them, either because he knew little of them, nor because their hour was not yet come in the designs of his malice, but his thought ever turned to Turgon. Therefore Hurin was brought before Morgoth, for Morgoth knew by his arts and his spies that Hurin had the friendship of the king, and he sought to daunt him with his eyes. But Hurin could not yet be daunted, and he defied Morgoth. Therefore Morgoth had him chained and set in slow torment, but after a while he came to him and offered him his choice to go free whither he would, or to receive power and rank as the greatest of Morgoth's captains, if he would but reveal where Turgon had his stronghold, and aught else that he knew of the king's counsels. But Hurin the steadfast mocked him, saying, "Blind you are, Morgoth Bauglir, and blind shall ever be, seeing only the dark. You know not what rules the hearts of men, and if you knew, you could not give it, but a fool is he who accepts what Morgoth offers. You will take first the price, and then withhold the promise, and I should get only death, if I told you what you ask." Then Morgoth laughed, and he said, "Death you may yet crave of me as a boon." Then he took Hurin to the Haudach in Nirneth, and it was then new built, and the reek of death was upon it. And Morgoth set Hurin upon its top, and bid him look west towards Hithlum, and think of his wife, and his son, and other kin. "For they dwell now in my realm," said Morgoth, "and they are at my mercy." "You have none," answered Hurin, "but you will not come at Turgon through them, for they do not know his secrets." Then wrath mastered Morgoth, and he said, "Yet I may come at you, and all your accursed house, and you shall be broken on my will, though you are all made of steel. And he took up a long sword that lay there and broke it before the eyes of Hurin, and the splinter wounded his face, but Hurin did not blanch. Then Morgoth, stretching out his long arm towards Dorlomin, cursed Hurin and Morwen and their offspring, saying, "Behold, the shadow of my thought shall lie upon them wherever they go, and my hate shall pursue them to the ends of the world." But Hurin said, "You speak in vain, for you cannot see them nor govern them from afar, nor while you keep this shape and desire to still be a king visible on earth." Then Morgoth turned upon Hurin, and he said, "Fool! Little among men, and they are the least of all that speak. Have you seen the Valar, or measured the power of Manwë and Varda? Do you know the reach of their thought? Or do you think, perhaps, that their thought is upon you, and that they may shield you from afar?" "I know not," said Hurin, "yet so it might be, if they willed, for the Eldar king shall not be dethroned while Arda yet endures." "You say it," said Morgoth. "I am the Elder King, Melkor, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends solely and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love, my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death." But Hurin answered, "Do you forget to whom you speak? Such things you spoke long ago to our fathers, but we escaped from your shadow. And now we have knowledge of you, for we have looked on the faces that have seen the light, and heard the voices that have spoken with Manwë. Before Arda you were, but others also, and you did not make it. Neither are you the most mighty, for you have spent your strength upon yourself, and wasted it in your own emptiness. No more are you now than an escaped thrall of the Valar, and their chain still awaits you." "You have learned the lessons of your masters by rote," said Morgoth, "but such childish lore will not help you. Now they are all fled away." "This last, then, I will say to you, thrall Morgoth," said Hurin, "and it comes not from the lore of the Eldar, but is put into my heart in this hour. You are not the Lord of men, and shall not be. Though all Arda and Menel fall in your dominion, beyond the circles of the world, you shall not pursue those who refuse you." "Beyond the circles of the world, I will not pursue them, for beyond the circles of the world there is nothing, and within them they shall not escape me until they enter into nothing." "You lie," said Hurin. "You shall see, and you shall confess that I do not lie," said Morgoth. And taking Hurin back to Angband, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim, from which he could see afar the land of Hithlum in the west, and the lands of Beleriand in the south. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth, and Morgoth, standing beside him, cursed him again, and set his power upon him, so that he could not move from that place, nor die until Morgoth should release him. "Sit now there," said Morgoth, "and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom you have delivered to me.
For you have dared to mock me, and have questioned the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore, with my eyes you shall see, and with my ears you shall hear, and nothing shall be hidden from you.